Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai.
Good morning, Adefemi.
How are we doing?
Doing good.
Okay, let's jump straight into our global brief before we go to our newspapers. And the two stories that are jumping out at us, of course, US politics. If you start off with President Biden, he has tested positive for Covid-19. It couldn't have come at a worse time. He was supposed to be making a campaign speech to a group focused on Latin American Hispanic voters, and it would have been interesting to see how he was able to capitalize off of that very strong outing at the NAACP just the day before. He was thereafter pictured without a face mask after this diagnosis. So those are, rallying questions on the one hand. But as I said, this is not great timing for President Biden. In addition to that, he's now having to be physically sidelined from campaigning because of his diagnosis, but then also having to listen to more and more senior Democrats saying, listen, you're going to have to take a bit more consideration when it comes to this campaign of yours and whether or not you are the best person to go ahead into leading the Democrats into this election. You've got more and more voices calling for him to step down. Nancy Pelosi allegedly was on a phone call with the president and was presenting different polls to him. And allegedly, the information out of those private phone calls are that President Biden has gone from saying, Kamala can't win, Kamala can't do it, to asking, could Kamala do it? So there seems to be some form of a shift. And that's because the concern now is legitimate. It's more so, aside from his own presidency, there are concerns that Democrats will lose seats, will lose power in Congress, in the Senate. So there have been more and more cries. I know, Rufai, you were showing me, and we were talking about the likes of Chuck Schumer and Schiff, saying that, listen, this is more than just you. So that's what we're seeing.
Big punchers. It's no longer some wing in the Democratic Party again.
So I think with him being sidelined with COVID-19, perhaps by the time he re-emerges, perhaps there'll be some sort of update, whether or not he's going to continue on the same tune of being the person who's going to lead this party into this election, or whether or not he'll finally listen to his supporters and people who do find themselves on the other side of this argument. Perhaps he will consider taking a step back. And it will, then that beggars questions as to who will replace him. Will it be Kamala Harris? Has she done enough over these past 4 years to inspire confidence in her leadership at the helm? Who knows? Well, that is what we're seeing on the one hand of US politics today. But on the other hand, it was the third day of the Republican National Congress, and you had J.D. Vance come out and formally accept the VP's nomination. His speech was very emotional to some extent. He talks about his humble beginnings, growing up in a small town. He's there pictured with his wife. As I said, he formally accepted to become Trump's running mate in this election. And he talked about his upbringing. He paid homage to his small town roots. He also mentioned his troubled childhood, the fact that his mother had a substance abuse problem, that many people that he grew up with have lost their lives to substance abuse and drug addiction. He also talks about his own tacitly policies. I think he was very, very careful to actually talk about policies, even though he is definitely speaking with the same voice as Donald Trump. He made sure not to talk about Ukraine, for example. He did not mention his stance on that war. So it will be interesting to see whether or not he's done enough. He is far younger than his running mate. He is, again, an embodiment of this American dream, being that he started from such humble beginnings and has been able to find himself as the Republican vice presidential nominee. But that's what we're seeing when we look at the RNC. But also there have been, on a softer note, there have been lots of pictures of supporters in the crowd also adorning their ears with the white square as a nod to former President Trump's iconic moment. It's become now a little bit of a poster boy moment for showing their support to President Trump. So that's what we're seeing on our global report, our global brief.
I mean, it's a sign of resilience. Femi, when the debate happened and it finished, I think one of the first things we called here, I remember I particularly called it, was, I do not think Biden has the capacity to finish up this race. And the first week, the likes of them, Akeem Jeffries, were those saying, don't worry, we'll rally around. In fact, what CNN and other news media outlets did say was he was going to go away after a week. After a couple of interviews, he was going to be back on his feet. But they're seeing, like I kept on saying, Femi, there's a cognitive issue. And I keep saying, what's my bona fide? Femi, my father was 86. He died just 2 years ago. You can't tell me anything I don't know about geriatrics. There was a cognitive issue there. That's why now Biden himself is saying, if the medical records are not looking right, probably I'll make a decision. The worst part is donor funds are drying off.
Yep.
The donors are not ready to put money in there. I think it's best he calls it quickly so that the party can move on and salvage whatever they have left. Like I'm still predicting a Trump victory. Everything is looking too good for Trump. You don't survive an assassination attempt in a week, and you have a major case thrown out of court for you in a week. He's on a bounce.
I mean,
Trump has got his mojo on.
Correct. We're also mentioning the shift in the RNC from the last election to this time. There does seem to be a unifying around Trump. He does seem to be more welcome.
Even
you talked to his
Haley
granddaughter
is
as well.
speaking, yeah.
Yes.
Even Nikki Haley is speaking in defense or speaking for Trump. But yesterday, I think one of the highlights of the RNC was the speech by Trump's granddaughter. And I thought this girl has gotten her grandfather 1 or 2 votes, extra votes. It was very heartfelt, even though obviously she was reading from his script, but it was very heartfelt. And if you saw the juxtaposing of Trump's expression while she was speaking, it just showed the human side to Trump, and the fact that beyond this man, everyone thinks he's so brash, so there's a family side to him. Of course, he has his history with his family, his controversies with his daughter Ivanka Trump, his controversies with his many wives, and so many things. But that moment for him was possibly one of the most powerful moments at the convention, especially because of the innocence of a teenager speaking about candy, even though people said he's still giving you candy and soda at 17. But it was really heartfelt, and I thought it was a good point. But then President Joe Biden, I'm thinking, even nature is against you, so why? A number of people are trying to, even the people who are speaking up strongly for him initially, like you talked about Nancy Pelosi's alleged phone call to him. Obama doesn't seem to be speaking up as strongly, and these were two principal figures in the Democratic Party that people had said were going to be deciders as to whether or not President Joe Biden would be running in November. So I feel it's so sad, and I hope he recovers fully. They say he's been vaccinated and boosted, so hopefully his recovery.
Dr. Rubin.
Okay, Republican Day Convention, Day 3. It was the day J.D. Vance accepted his nomination as vice presidential candidate, and 2 key issues in his submission. The first was that he tried to position the Republican Party as the party of the working class. And he was saying that, look, with J.D. Vance and Trump, J.D. Vance, that they will look out for the interests of working class Americans. And he linked that to his own background. He had written a biography called Hilly Billy. That's why he's referred to as Hilly Billy, even though he's 39. And he said, look, his mother was in the crowd. His mother had drug addiction issues and had to struggle with sobriety. He said he went through poverty, and then he ended up, getting to Yale University, and also he ended up marrying a woman, Usha Vance, that's her name, who also had her first primetime debut yesterday, who attended Yale and Cambridge. And he structured that speech to give hope to working class Americans that one of you is here beside Trump. But more or less, that Republican National Convention so far, which ended yesterday with a prayer, has positioned the Republican Party not as the Republican Party, not as the old GOP that we know, but as Donald Trump's party.
Right.
Everybody has been endorsing Donald Trump, from Amber Rose to Lara Trump, and then as, Ayo pointed out, Kai Trump. That's the name of the 17-year-old woman, saying, oh, this is a great grandfather. Would all of this help them? Well, it remains to be seen. There are other dimensions, because yesterday, Trump also granted an interview to Bloomberg. But I will review that when, Rotus comes with business stories. As for President Trump, he is saying that it is only if his doctors tell him that he has a serious medical condition that he will step down. So for now, he's still not planning to step down.
Biden, you mean?
They say he has, Biden rather. They say he has COVID in 2024.
It's possible. It's still going around.
His doctor O'Connor says he has a running nose and all that. He was to speak at a national civil rights organization event, Unidos US, and he couldn't make it. But earlier in the day, in Las Vegas, he had been on the campaign, train and all of that. But if they thought that this was part of the counter-programming strategy, it's negative, because it further confirms that 81, there are issues, about the age of President Trump. But maybe we'll get back on it. Maybe we would roll out of the September 21 debate. All of that remains to be seen.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Well, let's move on to some news headlines across the globe. We'll begin in Nigeria with This Day newspaper. And the front cover of This Day newspaper, firstly, the picture story has PDP governors, southern governors, meeting in Enugu yesterday. And they talk about how they believe APC leadership, specifically under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has failed Nigerians. And they also talk about how his leadership so far, into the first year of his presidency, has reversed what they call 16 years of PDP-led development. They've also warned INEC to ensure a fair playing ground in upcoming elections. Edo and in Ondo states, both of them will be going to gubernatorial elections very soon. So those were the conversations being discussed at the PDP Southern Governors Forum there. Moving on from This Day, the Daily Independent, it looks at also the PDP governors and lines coming out of there. And this time they are switching their attentions to River State and how they are moving to back Governor Siminalayi Fubara. And they also talk about the governors there and the issues, as I've aforementioned, in looking at This Day newspaper. So again, still looking at the PDP governors, that's definitely something that's reflected across the front page of many of our newspapers. But if we take a look at the front page of Punch magazine now, Punch are looking at a figure, an interesting figure that says more than 600,000 Nigerians applied for asylum under Buhari's leadership. So that's between 2016 and 2023. More than 600,000 Nigerians applying for asylum. That's according to StatusSense. And then another report under that same umbrella looked at how Nigerians topped the list of African countries seeking asylum in Canada. That was for 2023. I mean, first and foremost, if we put these numbers into context, we all know that Nigeria has a huge population. So naturally, when it looks at the movement of people, you will always seem to find Nigeria in these statistics because of the nature of our population. But it also underscores a holistic issue, a wider issue, that if people's needs are not being met in a country, they're going to be forced to become economic migrants into other ones. Asylum is slightly different from economic migration. Of course, there are many reasons why people may seek asylum, but clearly it underscores an issue in the country that they are applying from. So that is what is on the front page of The Punch. If we take a look at the Daily Trust mentions the Senate sacking Ali Ndume as chief whip. This falls back from comments he made last week. You remember we were discussing his comments on the front page of This Day, where he talked about President Bola Ahmed Tinubu having no idea what's going on, how the plight of Nigerians is just not something that is privy to the president because he's being protected or kept away from the issues at hand. And I do believe the Senate have interpreted that as a form of disloyalty and have sacked him. He's been replaced now by Tahir Mongono of Borno North. And I believe that has already happened. And again, this falls, I'm not too sure if any of us are surprised that this has happened because of the comments that he made last week, whether or not people think that this is a good thing or a bad thing, whether or not someone should be punished for speaking candidly about what their experience of the State House is as it stands, is up to interpretation. I know last week when we were discussing this, Dr. Rubin, you talked about how the president shouldn't fall victim to blackmail, and perhaps this is a result of that. So that's on the front page of the Daily Trust. If we look at the New Telegraph are reporting that the United Arab Emirates, they say that they are unaware of this $10,000 US dollar bank balance requirement as Nigerians apply for visas to travel to the United Arab Emirates. The interesting thing about this is the process for which Nigerians have to go through now is looking at a document verification hub, and it's that document verification hub where Nigerians are supposed to pay some 640,000 naira, and that is before they even pay for the visa itself. And apparently, another requirement is that a Nigerian applicant must have 10,000 US dollars over the course of 6 months in their banks. And I mean, it's one thing to say that you've lifted this ban on Nigerians being able to come into your country, and there's another thing to, constructively make it difficult for them to continue to do so. So that's the information looking at the New Telegraph. And then lastly, just yesterday, we were looking at, well, definitely The Guardian. The Guardian, if I get to our last story, The Guardian looks at, as you were mentioning, this 14 trillion naira deficit Nigeria's edging closer to, and that's as Tinubu adds 6.2 trillion naira to the budget. But lastly, Business Day, yesterday we were talking about how 13 Nigerian airlines had been blacklisted for non-payment of international lesser fees. They were believed to have taken these planes, rented these planes, but not paid for them. And you've got the likes of Air Peace and United Nigerian Airlines both saying that first and foremost they own the lion's share of their own fleet, so they're not owing anybody for lesser fees. And if anything, Air Peace talked about how they had lost $2 million when a company took their money and their plane and didn't return it. So those are the Nigerian papers. If we take a look at our African ones, the Daily Nation of Kenya, they have now pictured the man that they believe is responsible for the serial bodies that have been found in Wasteland. They have taken a picture of him and also spoken to people in his local area about him, finding out what they know. There are discussions about whether or not he was a married man. People say that they saw him with a lot of women, but perhaps didn't know he was married. And of course, he is accused at this point of murdering these women and dumping their bodies in this wasteland. Then also, we're looking at the Citizen of South Africa. Today is International Nelson Mandela Day, and their headline reads... July, yeah. Yes, and their headline reads, "What would Madiba say?" I mean, today is his birthday as well, is it not? Birthday, yeah. So they are talking about how they believe that today's state of affairs in South Africa is a betrayal to of the values and leadership coined by Madiba Mandela himself. And then lastly, if we take a quick look at the Daily Express in the UK, they talk about how Britain should be preparing for huge tax increases as this new Labour government gets itself ready for leadership. The King's Speech set out a record 40 bills yesterday, planning reforms and rail nationalisation, as well as French-style worker rights. I know we've coming to the end, but I would like to hear your thoughts on Nigerian papers, international papers, whatever you'd like to think about.
I'll go on these national papers. What will Madiba say? Madiba will probably look at them and say, you people have not continued the rainbow nation that we talked about.
Right.
A lot of pain and suffering in South Africa. A lot of avarice and political stealing has continued in my motherland. I'm sure that's what Madiba will say. Madiba will turn in his grave and he will not be happy about what the ANC has become today.
Right.
We said it earlier on, Femi. During the debates leading up to the UK elections, £48 billion spending golf, Keir Starmer couldn't account for. Rishi Sunak kept on asking him. Now, the British people will see higher taxes.
Right.
Right, so two things. I mean, I'll try to link them. The story about the PDP governors talking about how bad the country has become under the APC rule. And the truth is, just reading through the communique from that meeting, as an opposition, I would like to see a bit more substance. It's not enough to state the obvious. Everybody can see, we feel the pinch of what has happened under this administration. But what is the alternative? I'm not sure if the PDP is the alternative for a number of Nigerians in terms of what they offer, in terms of the... So what are their solutions to the challenges we face with the economy, with healthcare, education? So give us substance. We need strong opposition for a surviving democracy. That's the criticism I have with that. It's enough. It's easy to come out and say, oh yeah, it's been badly run. We see it's stating the obvious. But what is the alternative? What is the option for Nigerians? And then leading that to the unfortunate numbers, the fact that Nigerians are, by any means possible, asylum seekers are different from economic migrants because, according to it's based on race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular societal group that would say that your life is under threat in your nation, and so you're seeking asylum in another nation. Of course, you know that there are many reasons for this, but it's very sad that we've come to this point.
Okay, very quickly, let me talk about South Africa. Yeah, there's a book that I will recommend by Douglas Foster, titled After Mandela, The Struggle for Freedom in Post-Apartheid Africa. So, long before now, students of this subject have worried about what South Africa will look like after Mandela. And the main point of the book by Douglas Foster is about complexities, it's about issues with regard to freedom. And we have seen what has happened in South Africa. So nobody will be surprised that the prediction has come to pass. In England yesterday, the subject is the King's speech that was delivered. 40 new bills were introduced, the first legislative intervention by the Labour Party after 14 years, now that they're in power. But there are some issues in that legislative bill. There's one about the child benefit, two-child benefit tax cap.
Yes, the limit there.
Where all the parties, including Plate Camru and Labour Party backbenchers, are protesting. But the Starmer government has introduced a child poverty task force. Right. How far will that go? Workers are going to get more rights. Now, Daily Mail is asking, how would that help economic growth? Renters and squatters, they've been given more rights. Housing planning, about 1.5 million houses in the next 3 years. Yeah. All of that is there in this thing. I can't list all the 40. It's quite a long list. Mm-hmm. But what is important is that Kestama is talking about growth. Yes. He's talking about planning. Today, he's going to meet in Oxfordshire at a summit. And on the sidelines, he will meet with President Macron. And he's going to address the issue about migration. Sure. And the deal will be, okay, some of these asylum seekers will be allowed to stay. Right. Then some will be turned back, the small boat channel crossers and all that. So these are the issues. It's a new Britain. But some of the papers say it's a red revolution because Labour is tilting towards workers and migrants. All right. Then we'll see how it plays out.
All right, thank you so much, Adifemi, for taking us around the world. Hey. Always good to see you.